Imagine a country that is hardly ever talked about. It seems invisible, with no scandals or wars to grab headlines, nor presidents who appear on television every other minute to stir up controversy. A country that, for many, is little more than a name on a school map. Well, that sums up Paraguay, precisely, the subject of our video today on VisualPolitik. And why on earth are we talking about Paraguay right now? Well, because even though it's a quiet place that doesn't usually get much attention, one of the most interesting and decisive battles in all of Latin America is being fought there. A battle between artificial intelligence, economic takeoff, and cocaine and marijuana. Yes, that's right, you heard correctly. In this very territory, we can find enough energy to fuel the next technological revolution, a fashion market, and also loads of small planes dropping drug packages in cornfields. We're talking about the only country in the Americas, along with Bolivia, that has no access to the sea, a country that is almost the size of Spain, but has only 7 million inhabitants, and a country whose economy could also be experiencing its own economic miracle.
Mientras el mundo se tambalea, nosotros estamos construyendo algo diferente, un modelo que funciona, un modelo que genera confianza porque genera resultados. Los números hablan por sí solos. Tuvimos un crecimiento económico del 5.2% en el primer semestre del 2025, mientras que la región crecía apenas al 2%. Nuestra inflación se encuentra controlada en menos del 5% por debajo del promedio regional.
To give you an idea of the expectations, the Paraguayan government has launched the ambitious Paraguay 2X, a plan, a strategy that seeks nothing less than to double the size of the economy in just a decade. To do so, they would have to achieve annualized growth of more than 7% throughout that period. And how do they intend to achieve this? Well, let's see. We're talking about a country neighboring Argentina, Milei's Argentina, so I'm sure you can guess. That's right, by betting on a free market model, with fewer obstacles, more exports, and up to 400 measures to modernize the bureaucracy and facilitate investment.
Paraguay aims for double-digit economic growth with a free market strategy.
While much of Latin America is grappling with fiscal deficits, inflation, or political instability, Paraguay has decided to go for something completely different, following the path revealed by Milei. Well, it's not quite that extreme, but they do want to gain a lot more economic freedom. That's the formula. The bet is clear, and the numbers are beginning to back up that narrative. But this is only half the story. Because while the country is opening up to foreign capital, it is simultaneously waging a very different war. A war against drug trafficking, against the informal economy, and against a system of corruption that remains deeply entrenched. Remember we mentioned the war between AI and drug traffickers earlier? Well, that's right. AI is beginning to play a surprising role. From tracking illegal marijuana crops to detecting smuggling networks through pattern and data analysis. And this paradox presents us with a fascinating dilemma. How can a country be, at the same time, a refuge for criminals and a new magnet for technological investment? How can an economic miracle coexist with such an apparently weak state? Is Paraguay a new success story in the making, or just another mirage? Well, in this video we're going to answer precisely those questions, because what is happening in Paraguay is not only relevant to Paraguayans, it's a sign of where Latin America could go or not. Let's get started.
The Paraguayan miracle?
While everyone talks about Brazil, Mexico, or Chile, Paraguay is like a neighbour who has always been there, but whom almost no one pays attention to. However, quietly, little by little, it has become one of the most stable and promising economies in Latin America. The IMF estimates that Paraguay grew by 4% in 2024, and projects annual growth of 3.5% until 2030. And by comparison, the regional average will barely reach 2%. In relative terms, Paraguay is going full throttle, while its neighbours are still in second gear. And it's not a stroke of luck. This country has enjoyed exemplary stability for years. The exchange rate has remained around 7,000 guaranis per dollar for 2 decades. And while Argentina was breaking inflation records and Brazil was devaluing its currency time and again, Paraguay seems like another planet. So the question is, how has it achieved all this? What is the secret behind what some are already calling the Paraguayan miracle? Well, here's a clue.
Paraguay positioned to become South America's Silicon Valley with clean energy advantage.
No, Asunción has not been flooded with tech unicorns. The key to Paraguay's economic miracle can be summed up in 2 words: hydroelectric power. With only 7 million inhabitants, Paraguay is the world's largest net exporter of clean energy. 99.9% of its electricity is renewable, very cheap, and free of CO2 emissions. The explanation lies in its two gigantic dams, Itipu and Yacyretá, shared with Brazil and Argentina. Two colossuses that have turned the country into a kind of Kuwait of green electricity. And right now, when artificial intelligence and data mining demand enormous amounts of clean and cheap energy, Paraguay has come onto the radar of giants such as Alphabet, Meta, Nvidia, and even OpenAI.
I visited San Francisco, home to all the major tech companies, and we're in talks with Google, OpenAI, and others. We're also partnering with Taiwan to develop semiconductor and microchip production capacity. Our goal is to make Paraguay the technology center of the region and the world, taking advantage of our cheap electricity.
The truth is that Peña is not exaggerating. While half the world is looking for ways to power its data centers without breaking the bank on electricity bills, Paraguay has a giant power outlet. Cheap, clean, and abundant energy. And that's only part of it. In 2025, it also led the world in tourism growth. Okay, this is largely due to Argentinians and Brazilians crossing the border to shop or watch soccer, and basically because it had been one of the countries with the least tourism on the entire continent. But regardless, that is the trend, and it's bringing in dollars. But most notably, there has also been a boom in residency applications. More and more Europeans and North Americans are moving there, attracted by the stable exchange rate, low cost of living, and, of course, low taxes. Because yes, Paraguay is a low-tax country with a big advantage for foreigners. Income generated outside Paraguay is not taxed in Paraguay. And what does this mean? Well, if you are a resident of this country and you have remote activities or foreign investments, you may not pay anything. Pretty attractive, don't you think? Be that as it may, construction has also joined this incipient takeoff. New skyscrapers, urban projects, luxury neighborhoods, such as the Perseverancia district, for example, a private investment of $300 million, or the Petra Imperial, a 73-story skyscraper that aims to be the fourth tallest in all of South America, complete with swimming pools and Roman sculptures. And yes, I know all this smacks of modernity, of a leap forward in development. But let's not get ahead of ourselves just yet. We're still in Latin America, and Paraguay also suffers from many of the most common problems in the region. Take a look.
Informal employment grew by 3.3%, reaching 1,522,000 people. By 2024, informal employment would reach 62.5% of the total workforce nationwide. Among young people aged 15 to 19, 91.1% work informally, according to data provided by the INE.
While glass towers flourish in the center of Asunción, the story is still different on the outskirts. Thousands of families continue to live in precarious housing, next to rusty roads, selling ice or home remedies to survive, because logically, development does not happen overnight. That said, poverty has fallen from 50% in 2003 to 20% in 2023. But the reality is that capital is very highly concentrated, and more than 1.5 million Paraguayans still live in extreme poverty. In fact, in general, the enormous prosperity that the macro figures seem to reflect is not clearly perceived on the street, which largely explains why President Peña's popularity has fallen by more than 7 points in a single year. Rising prices, poor healthcare, lack of security, unemployment, and a president who's more visible abroad than at home. Almost 50 trips in just 1 year. However, the biggest warning sign, and one that doesn't seem to fit with the idyllic and promising vision we saw a moment ago, is foreign direct investment. Despite Peña's travels around the world, it continues to fall. In terms of foreign investment, Paraguay peaked in 2012 with $970 million. And since then, it has just kept falling. So the question is, why on earth is foreign investment not taking off in a country that, as we've told you, has so much cheap energy, so much stability, and so much potential? Well, the answer lies in the very rivers that power its dams, because they also happen to be drug trafficking highways. And VisualPolitik community, this is precisely where the real Achilles heel lies. Because while artificial intelligence and industry demand legal certainty, Paraguay remains trapped in a conflict with organized crime. That is the real reason why things aren't coming together. So let's take a closer look at all this, because this is crucial to everything that may await this country in the near future. Pay attention.
The big problem.
So far, everything sounded pretty good, right? A stable country, cheap electricity, plans for new luxury neighborhoods and skyscrapers, and even tourists shopping duty-free in Ciudad del Este. But it turns out that in Paraguay, what water gives, water also takes away. The same rivers that generate clean megawatts to power data centers at a brutally reduced marginal cost are also the highways along which mountains of cocaine, marijuana, weapons, and even contraband tobacco circulate. So what starts out as an out-of-the-spotlight country becomes the perfect hideout for the shadiest businesses on the entire continent. If Paraguay is a quiet country, so to speak, by Latin American standards, it is mainly because crime is not experienced in the same way as it is in Mexico or Colombia, with omnipresent cartels and drug traffickers with their own ballads written about them. Crime does exist, but here it is much more subtle. The fact that Paraguay goes unnoticed is precisely the criminal's strongest card. No one suspects a country that doesn't make the headlines, and they have known how to exploit this to the full. For example, in 2022, Operation A Ultranza PY was launched, a large-scale operation that had been in the works for 3 years, and has become the largest anti-drug operation in the country's history. The result? 2 ministers dismissed, and at least 18 members of the drug cartel charged. This tells us that the influence of these groups extends to the government itself. Did you know about this operation? Probably not, and that's the key. Drug traffickers operate in Paraguay because no one is looking there. In 2021, it didn't even appear in the top 15 of the Global Organized Crime Index, but a year later, everything changed. The murder of prosecutor Marcelo Pecci in Colombia set off alarm bells and led to Paraguay being ranked as the 4th most organized crime-ridden country in the world in 2023, behind only Myanmar, Colombia, and Mexico. Wait, what? 4th in the world in the blink of an eye? Yes, indeed, Paraguay goes unnoticed. But when the eyes of the world turn to it, many shady things begin to come to light. Let's take a look at the map. Paraguay, landlocked, shares a triple border with Bolivia, Brazil, and Argentina. And far from being an obstacle, its location is perfect for moving tons of drugs across rivers and poorly monitored routes. It's a precisely orchestrated dynamic that almost no one talks about.
Cocaine coming from Peru, Colombia, or Ecuador arrives in Paraguay by small planes and is transported to the ports of Buenos Aires and Montevideo, which are on the Atlantic Ocean, or passes through the country's own ports. From here, cocaine begins to be sent to countries in Europe, Africa, and even the Middle East.
Traffickers from major cocaine-producing countries use small planes to send drugs to Paraguay. Yes, small planes. Short flights in which they drop their cargo in Paraguayan fields and then calmly return to refuel. And the worst part, Paraguay has hardly any radar to monitor its aerospace, something the government has promised to fix. But for now, it's almost like inviting the drug traffickers in and leaving them the keys to the house. The drugs then pass to the key point, the Paraguay-Parana waterway. This is a river highway stretching over 3,400 kilometers that connects Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil, and also borders Bolivia and Uruguay. From there, the purchase is sent to ports such as Santos in Brazil, Buenos Aires in Argentina, Montevideo in Uruguay, to continue its journey to Europe, Africa, or the Middle East. And keep in mind, this is one of the main routes in the world, and everything passes through Uruguay. Of course, Paraguay is not only a transit hub, it also produces, and a lot. It's estimated that the country cultivates some 7,000 hectares of marijuana per year. To give you an idea, this figure is equivalent to about 10,000 soccer fields. The epicenter is Pedro Juan Caballero, which, although it sounds like a person's name with surnames and everything, is actually a city located on the border with Brazil. Well, the Paraguayan marijuana produced there is reported to be the best on the market. Add to that the fact that Brazil, with almost 220 million inhabitants, is one of the largest consumers of cannabis in the region, and it's clear to see $1 million business is waiting to be made. A business that has sparked wars between local clans and Brazilian gangs. In fact, violence in Pedro Juan Caballero has skyrocketed, with murders and shootings in the streets. And take note, because besides being the largest producer of marijuana in South America, this country is also, as I said, one of the main distributors of cocaine. In 2023, after receiving scanners donated by Taiwan, the government celebrated a supposed breakthrough in the fight against drugs, but reality brought them back down to earth just a few weeks later. 12 tons of cocaine, hidden in black sesame seeds, arrived in Hamburg undetected. A stark reminder of how difficult it is to stop networks that are not sitting idly by. The business is too big not to respond. Behind all this is the PCC, Brazil's largest criminal organization, which has had a strong presence in Paraguay since the mid-2010s. Its strategy is to control marijuana, use the same routes for cocaine, partner with local clans, and recruit young Paraguayans. In fact, these days, the PCC dominates part of the border and also distribution networks in Asuncion and other cities. And as I said, from there, the drugs flow to the port of Santos, the largest in Latin America. But beware, it's not just about narcotics. Paraguay has also become a source of arms trafficking. Purchase laws are so lax that Brazilian criminals can easily stock up on rifles, ammunition, and pistols in this market. And since the routes are already open, the gangs have taken advantage of this to diversify their business, smuggling weapons, tobacco, counterfeit goods, electronics, in short, an entire massive operation. But since we're talking about businesses, if organized crime is the muscle, corruption is the glue that holds it all together. And we're not the ones saying it. Take a look at the Corruption Perception Index for Paraguay in 2024. In the latest Transparency International report, Paraguay was ranked 149th out of 180 countries in terms of corruption. To give you an idea, it's on par with Bangladesh, the Central African Republic, Congo, and Mozambique. In other words, it plays in the first division of bribery. In contrast, its other cool neighbor, Uruguay, is the complete opposite. It ranks 13th in the world in the same ranking and the same region. So what on earth is going on in this country? Well, it's simple. The scandals are so blatant that they reach the highest echelons of power. For example, former Congressman Juan Carlos Osorio was charged with drug trafficking, money laundering, and criminal association, and Senator Enrico Galeno was also prosecuted for links to drug traffickers and money laundering. And no, these are not isolated cases. They are just two examples of a system where drug traffickers not only exert influence, but also sit in Congress. That's why, in a way, it's such a stable country. The drug traffickers already have what they want. At least until the people say, enough is enough. In 2017, thousands of protesters set fire to Congress after an attempt to enable presidential re-election. It was an image that went largely unnoticed beyond its borders, but marked a turning point. And today, Generation Z is returning to the streets, fed up with so much corruption and impunity.
29th September 2025. After Peru, Paraguay's Generation Z also takes to the streets.
The most surprising thing is that when there were only between 500 and 1,000 young people protesting, the government responded with 3,000 police officers who hunted them down one by one, even in their homes. A scene that, truthfully, would seem more fitting for Venezuela than Paraguay. Want another example? The Paracel mega project, a cellulose consortium with European and Paraguayan investment that promised $4 billion and thousands of jobs. The result? Delays, cost overruns, and doubts about the integrity of some of the actions of former President Horacio Cartes, who, incidentally, has been sanctioned by the United States for corruption. Under his leadership, the project ended up embroiled in a torrent of opaque contracts, dubious tenders, and political ties that scared off more than one foreign investor. This case demonstrates how corruption in Paraguay not only slows down projects, but also turns them into real traps for capital. And this is precisely where the idea of an economic miracle and the optimism touted by President Peña threaten to crumble. Take a look at this data. According to official figures, Paraguay enjoys an electricity surplus of around 40% of the production of the Itaipú hydroelectric power plant, which sometimes reaches as much as 80%. This is the energy that, as we've already mentioned, could drive a possible economic miracle in the country, and it is the carrot that the government is dangling most to foreign investors. However, despite this huge surplus, it's not uncommon to see news stories like this.
Massive blackout leaves much of Paraguay without power at peak hour.
The country has serious problems with its electrical transport infrastructure. Not only that, but experts warn that without urgent investment, the energy surplus from the Itaipú plant will be exhausted by 2030. But even with energy, who's going to take advantage of it? Because this is not the only problem. For example, the education system is a disaster. According to some reports, the poorest students are several years behind their counterparts in OECD countries. And given that foundation, building a technology sector in the country is practically impossible unless a large part of the jobs come from outside and remain in foreign hands. The result? Many young people still don't see a bright future in their country. This frustration means that instead of learning computer programming or studying engineering, many end up being recruited by drug traffickers. It pays better, it's faster, and there's less bureaucracy. And of course, all this exacerbates inequality and underpins poverty. At the top, we see hyper-efficient agribusinesses and luxury towers, which, let's not kid ourselves, in many cases, are money laundering operations.
Increases risk of money laundering in the real estate sector. Paraguay faces a growing threat of money laundering in the real estate sector, with Asuncion and Mariano Roque Alonso joining the list of high-risk areas.
Meanwhile, at the bottom, there are hundreds of thousands, even millions, who survive in the informal work sector. It's a grotesque contrast. Of course, to be fair, this is nothing new in Latin America, it must be said. In short, in Paraguay, corruption and drug trafficking are not a specific problem. They are a business model, even if they make much less noise than in other neighboring countries. They slow down investment, sabotage energy, undermine education, and turn every potential boom into a bubble of expectations that ultimately fizzles out. Paraguay could become a regional technology hub and an example of energy transition. But even today, the same rivers that could power artificial intelligence servers are more often used to transport marijuana and cocaine. That's a problem. And remember, it's not only damaging the country, it makes it a key player in regional crime. Until Asuncion manages to break this vicious cycle, the massive influx of multi-million-dollar foreign investment from the technology sector to take advantage of its cheap energy will remain just a dream. So naturally, at this point, the question is clear. Will Paraguay be the next technological powerhouse in Latin America? Or will it continue to be the gas station for drug traffickers? Will it be artificial intelligence or criminal intelligence that wins out? Well, leave us your opinion in the comments and let's see what you think. And you know, if you like this video, don't forget to like it and subscribe to VisualPolitik if you haven't already. It's free and it helps us out a lot. Thank you very much for watching. All the best. I'll see you next time.